Intellectual disabilities are commonly misunderstood. They are defined by the American Association on Mental Retardation as significantly sub-average general intellectual functioning, existing concurrently with deficits in adaptive behavior, and manifested during the developmental period. 3 factors must be taken into account in order for a person to be classified as intellectually disabled. First, a person must have sub-average intellectual functioning. Intelligence quotient, IQ tests are one means of determining sub-average functioning, but it is important not to confuse IQ with intellectual disability. A common standard is an IQ of 70 or below. But numbers alone do not always determine intellectual disability. Second, a person must have difficulty coping in the everyday world. People with intellectual disabilities, particularly in less severe forms, are often able to be autonomous members of society, holding jobs, and living without assistance. However, they have greater difficulty than the average person in dealing with stressful situations. Their intellectual development and reasoning are limited, as is their ability to predict cause and effect. Third, the disability must manifest itself prior to adulthood, which is usually considered age 18. Atkins versus Virginia, 536 U.S. 304, 2002, is a case in which the Supreme Court of the United States ruled 6-3 that executing people with intellectual disabilities violates the Eighth Amendment's ban on cruel and unusual punishments, but states can define who has an intellectual disability. At the time Atkins was decided, just 18 of the 38 death penalty states exempted intellectually disabled offenders from the death penalty. It is unconstitutional to impose the death penalty upon individuals with intellectual disability. But poor legal representation and onerous evidentiary requirements still result in death sentences and executions of intellectually disabled defendants. The Atkins case was a seminal moment in the history of the death penalty, not only because it spared the lives of a vulnerable class of defendants, but it also provided a blueprint for achieving other limitations on the practice, or even for eliminating it altogether. Even after the court's decision in 2002, some states continued to use arcane practices in the determination of intellectual disability, so further supervision has been required. Between 1989 and 2002, 16 states outlawed executing intellectually disabled people, bringing the total to 18 of the 38 states that have the death penalty at that time. The court also looked to public opinion polls that have consistently shown support for banning executions for people with intellectual disabilities, as well as international law and opinion that universally condemns the practice. James Lee Clark, born on May 13, 1968, had an intellectual disability, whose controversial execution by the state of Texas sparked international outcry. The controversy involved the argument that his execution violated the U.S. Supreme Court ruling in Atkins versus Virginia, which held that executions of intellectually disabled criminals is cruel and unusual punishment, which is prohibited by the Eighth Amendment. On June 7, 1993, the bodies of Shari Cruz and 16-year-old Jesus Gilberto Garza, a classmate and acquaintance, were found in Clear Creek north of Denton. Both had been robbed and shot in the head the night of June 7, 1993. Denton County law enforcement officers pulled Cruz's nude body from the water. Cruz had a pair of shorts around her neck, and her bra tied around her wrist. Marks on her other wrist indicated that she had been bound. The medical examiner later verified that Cruz had been sexually assaulted and died from a shotgun blast to the back of the head. Further evidence revealed that rings Cruz normally wore were missing, along with keys she usually carried with her, as well as keys that she kept in the glove compartment of her car. Earlier that same morning, paramedics and police officers were dispatched to a service station in response to a gunshot victim. Officers arrived to find James Lee Clark and James Brown, who was suffering from a gunshot wound to the leg. Both Clark and Brown told the officers that they had been fishing at the Three Rivers Bridge in Denton County when Brown was accosted by a robber and shot in the leg. However, when James Lee Clark led the police to the area where this shooting allegedly took place, there was no sign that the men had been there fishing or that someone had been shot. After Clark gave the police several conflicting statements, and the police further talked with Brown and other witnesses, the police returned to the creek to look for a second body and 2 weapons. Later that day, the body of 16-year-old Jesus Garza, who had apparently been at the creek with Cruz, was pulled from the water. Garza also died from a shotgun blast to the head which had been fired from fairly close range. The police also recovered a .22 rifle with the stock sawed off from the water, and a 12-gauge shotgun, which was later determined to be the murder weapon. DNA evidence, taken from Cruz's body, was compared with a sample provided by Clark and proved James Lee Clark sexually assaulted Cruz. Blood found on Clark's tennis shoes was shown to be consistent with a mixture of Cruz and Garza's blood. Additionally, a search of Clark's trailer yielded the sawed-off rifle stock, which was found to match the .22 rifle found in the creek, and ammunition for the rifle. Evidence was also presented that, a day or 2 prior to the murders, Clark, accompanied by Brown, bought ammunition for the 12-gauge shotgun. On April 29, 1994, a Denton County jury found James Clark guilty of capital murder in the death of Shari Cruz, and on May 3, 1994, the trial court sentenced Clark to death. On October 2, 1996, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals affirmed Clark's conviction and sentence. On October 6, 1997, James Lee Clark filed a post-conviction application for writ of habeas corpus, presenting 11 challenges to the validity of his conviction and sentencing. On April 8, 1998, the trial judge adopted the state's findings of fact and conclusions of law and recommended that relief be denied. On July 8, 1998, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals adopted these findings and denied relief. On September 30, 1998, James Lee Clark filed a federal petition for writ of habeas corpus. On November 10, 1999, the magistrate court entered findings recommending that the petition for writ of habeas corpus be denied. On December 13, 1999, the district court adopted these findings and denied Clark's petition for federal writ of habeas corpus. On January 28, 2000, the district court denied Clark's request for a certificate of appealability, and on March 3, 2000, the district court denied Clark's motion for reconsideration. On September 12, 2000, Clark's application for COA in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals was denied. On February 20, 2001, the U.S. Supreme Court denied Clark's petition for writ of certiorari. The trial court set an execution date for November 21, 2002. However, on November 11, 2002, James Lee Clark filed a subsequent application for writ of habeas corpus in the state court, raising 7 allegations for relief. On November 18, 2002, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals concluded that Clark's allegation of mental retardation pursuant to Atkins v. Virginia deserved consideration. The court issued a stay of execution and remanded the case to the trial court for consideration of the claim. An evidentiary hearing was held in the trial court, after which the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals concluded that James Lee Clark failed to show, by a preponderance of the evidence, that he was mentally retarded and thus exempt from the death penalty under Atkins. Ex parte Clark. The trial court reset Clark's execution date for April 27, 2004. However, on April 23, 2004, the Fifth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals granted Clark's motion to file a successive habeas petition in federal district court and stayed his execution. On January 20, 2005, the district court rendered final judgment denying the successive habeas corpus petition. On March 16, 2005, the district court granted Clark's application for a certificate of appealability. On July 20, 2006, the Fifth Circuit Court affirmed the judgment of the district court and denied habeas relief. On August 29, 2006, the court denied James Lee Clark's petition for a hearing. On February 26, 2007, the Supreme Court denied Clark's petition for writ of certiorari. The trial court reset his execution date for April 11, 2007. The case drew international attention and campaigns to stop the execution were waged by Amnesty International, Amnesty USA, Petitions Online, Urgent Action Network, Texas Moratorium Network and other anti-death penalty groups. On April 11, 2007, James Lee Clark was executed in Huntsville Unit, Huntsville, Texas. Clark, already strapped down to a gurney when the witnesses arrived, blinked and smiled when the prison warden, Charles O'Reilly, asked if Clark had a last statement to make. I don't know, he said with a nervous chuckle. I don't know what to say. I don't know. Clark then turned and appeared to see the witnesses behind the glass. I didn't know anybody was there, he said with another laugh. Howdy. With that, he made a noise like a gurgle and was still. He was pronounced dead at 6:17 p.m., 7 minutes after the lethal chemicals began to flow into his veins. James Lee Clark was 38 years at the time of his execution. Garza's mother, Linda Garza, an uncle and one of his sisters watched calmly as they stood close to the glass. Afterward, they were quickly led away by guards and did not comment on the execution. Though Clark technically was executed for cruise rape and murder, and he never was tried for the killing of Jesus Garza, Clark was the 12th person to be executed in Texas that year. James Brown is now serving a 20-year prison sentence for robbery, blamed the fatal shootings on Clark. Clark blamed them on Brown. DNA evidence tied Clark to cruise rape and shooting. Thank you for watching Death Row.